Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, inshallah, we'll talk about biomes. You can study living things on an individual basis. And then you can study individuals in their community, in their populations, how they interact with individuals of their own species. And then you can study living things in their communities with other species. And in their ecosystem, how these communities interact with their environment. That's an ecosystem. And then ecosystems of similar regions, similar characteristics, they make up biomes. All the biomes combined together on the planet make the biosphere. Bio referring again to life or living things. So a biome is a large group of ecosystems that share the same type of climax community. So are some examples of some biomes. If you look at these pictures just from a distance, they have a different feel. I mean, in other words, you can tell when you're in a desert, right? Versus a tropical rainforest, right? If I just showed you a picture of a desert, you can't mistake that from a picture of a tropical rainforest, right? But what's the difference between a tropical rainforest and, for example, over here, a temperate rainforest versus a taiga over here or a savanna over here? Those are less distinct differences, correct? And what's the difference between a marine biome versus a freshwater biome, or a savanna versus a taiga, correct? Biomes, there's no agreed upon classification of these. So some authorities classify them into like 8 categories, some of them let's say in 10 categories, but most agree on the following. Now, if you look at this, below the polar cap are these 2 biomes, this purple and the green ones. They're the TNT, like that one, the tundra and the taiga. It's very important to understand these, especially nowadays because of this global warming business, because these biomes are changing very dramatically. And so if you won't be able to understand those changes unless you understand what they're supposed to be, what they are. If you go up and way up in the North Canada and most of Canada, you are in the TNT zone, the tundra and taiga. Same with over here in Russia and Northern Europe, see. And below them are the mixed and deciduous forest. Okay, those are like over here. And this is steppe, you'll see grasslands. And then the desert. And you can kind of see that the pattern is similar, right? The purple on the top, and then the green, and then the yellow, and then this near the equator, you see savannas and deserts, correct? Therefore, one can reasonably conclude that the ecosystem or the biome that you find at a particular geographic location of the Earth depends on its proximity to Disneyland in Florida. The equator. Yes, to the equator. That determines basically, in a way, the temperature, the average temperature of that area and precipitation. You can conclude that that biomes are different based on their geographic location and their proximity to the equator. The question is the following. Okay, so if the equator is supposed to be so hot, how come there's a lot of green stuff, tropical rainforest near the equator, and not deserts, right? Very good question. So, climate, right? The area is going to look the way it does in close proximity to the equator, because that determines its average temperature. But if it's not dependent on the average temperature, what does that mean? What do you think? There must be a second factor, right? Let's say if a plant doesn't grow, right? I say, okay, this plant does not grow in the shade, but it is in the sun. It's not growing. How come it's not growing? It's in the sun. Because why? It's not getting any water. Nobody's watering the poor plant. How's it going to grow if there's no water, right? Do you understand? So there must be a second factor. Proximity to the equator does make it warmer, right? Everybody goes to vacation where? To Canada? No, they all want to go south, closer to the equator. Birds migrate south, closer to the equator in wintertime, right? Why? Because it's warmer there. But look, when you go on an airplane, it says temperature gauges, right? You watch. What happens as the airplane climbs up and up and up? It gets colder. Yes? isn't it? It's fascinating. And when the airplane descends, if you watch it carefully, it goes from like negative 30 degrees, whatever, gets warmer and warmer to, yeah? So, what does that mean? Are you telling me if you could jump like really high, like Superman jump, boom, like up straight up into the air, let's say you jump like 2 miles up high, you come back as a popsicle. Is that right? You bet you do. The farther away you are from the surface of the earth, the colder it is. So, what if you just pile up a lot of dirt over here, a huge mountain up here? What do you think should clamp them on? What's it going to be? Huh? It's get colder. So what's that called, going up away from the ground level? The altitude. There's another factor, therefore. All right. Aquatic biomes, water biomes, are divided into two big categories. There are the marine biomes and the freshwater biomes, saltwater and the freshwater. So freshwater, like lakes and ponds and wetlands and rivers and estuaries and etc. And the marines are saltwater, like oceans and coral reefs. Water biomes, you can't ignore water biomes. In fact, life on land depends on life on ocean. It's all interconnected. Freshwater biomes and marine or saltwater biomes. A story. In a marine biome, let's say closer to the ocean floor, to the ocean, different parts of the ocean have different biotic and abiotic factors. An ocean is not a homogeneous same population from here to there. It's different. In other words, if you take a sample of ocean life closer to the shore, it'd be very different from a sample of ocean life farther away from the shore. What I'm trying to say is the communities closer to the shore are different from deep oceans. The first key distinction is the very top layer of water is called the photic zone, Photic, the photic zone, because light is able to penetrate. A deeper zone is called aphotic zone. It means there's no light there. Therefore, the life is going to be different. There are living things, there are plant-like things deep in the ocean. Photosynthetic. How? No. There's no light there. But there are strange-looking creatures in the deep ocean. That's one key distinction in the oceans. Photic and the aphotic zone. The second thing is, very close to the shore over here, this is called the littoral zone. The word littoral means shoreline. It's a fancy word for shoreline. Very different life that lives over here, because they have to have particular adaptations to even survive there. So many times you'll see over here starfishes, because they have suction cups. No wonder you see starfishes by the seashore, because they have adaptations to allow them to be there. So in the littoral zones, the life is different than in the open waters. And the plant life is also different. For example, there are floating plants here. You know, plants float. We talked about this briefly. You know why plants float? Because in these plants, in the leaves of these plants, between cells, there's gaps where there is air. They're buoyant. There's air in those leaves. Make them float. Now, this term estuary is very cool. Now, you must have wondered about this. I don't know, I did. Okay, the river water ends up in the ocean, right? Right? How come they don't mix in the end, everything's the same, right? First of all, river goes in a certain direction because why? Of gravity. It goes from higher altitude to lower altitude, right? Water doesn't go backwards, right? How's the river going to go backwards? No, that's one reason they don't mix, because the water's flowing this way. But when the river meets the ocean, there's some mixing of the two waters. Those areas are called estuaries. Now, the result is that they have some unique ecosystems. Estuaries are salt tolerant. If you go to Florida or something like that, you see these. You probably drove past them if you go to Florida or something, and you never realized what they were. Yeah. But if you are cognizant of them, if you're around rivers and ocean areas, if you go to California, East Coast and stuff, you see these. Where are you going to see estuaries? Where rivers meet saltwater, right? So if you think about it, if you go Florida, California, East Coast, keep this in mind. You'll see it's cool. You see very special type of creatures there. So cordgrass and salt marsh hay, you've seen this too, I bet. And there's the eelgrass. It looks like eel, underwater eelgrass, okay? So these are estuaries. Their roots are all entangled, like all roots are all almost like one big giant carpet of grass. What they do is these roots, they trap food, they trap little creatures and stuff like that. They are frequently what are called nursery habitats. They're like kindergarten, daycare places. What are they? Daycare places. Nursery habitats for small creatures like snails, crabs, and shrimps. So here they are. See this baby? The daycare. Baby snails. They're just hanging tight. Oh, that looks like a shrimp to me. And nursery habitats have a lot of little creatures like this, right? They attract predators. So frequently, if you see this, you see all kind of like foxes, like birds trying to hunt after them in ships and trying to make an easy catch, right? Estuaries are close to oceans and fresh water, right? One of the unique characteristics of these zones is the effect of tides. The effect of tides. Now, why do tides happen? Moon's gravitational force. Whichever side the moon is, it's going to attract water to that side. Gravity. Plain as that. What happens is when this happens, there's a tide on the other side too. So if you pull the earth this way, the water pulled this way, it's also going to affect tide on that side. There's going to be tide twice a day. When the moon is here, right, there's going to be tide here. When the moon is on the other side, the earth rotates one time in 24 hours, right? So this side will get tide here, and then 12 hours later it's going to get another tide because the moon is on the other side. Okay, so how many tides are there in a day? 2. So this is like tide level. I mean, it's high tide, the tide can go really high. Look at the difference here. The waves are coming and going here, right? But look, all of us, what would you think could happen? All of a sudden, a wave came from here to here. Oh, what happened to all these people? Will the wave come here? Yes, it will. With the next tide. Now, as I suggested, near the shore, living things have to have certain adaptations. This is the intertidal zone. This is low tide and this is the high tide. This is how low water zone, this is the high water zone, right? So low water zone, high tide. Look at the living things that live over here. Crabs over here, the anemones over here, everything that has like suction cups. These living things are there because of their peculiar needs. You go to Hawaii, there are a lot of tide pools, not tadpoles. Tide pools, tide pools. What happens is, if the land is uneven, the tide comes and the tide leaves, but there's like a puddle of water there, and it always stays there. That's called a tide pool. And it's really curious because you see some strange creatures there. Allow them to be strong. This barnacles is very interesting creatures. This is their mouth. Okay, it opens up. These barnacle thingies, they come out like this and they filter whatever's out there and they go back in their mouth. Filter out there, go back in their mouth. It's kind of cool. They filter. We are exploring aquatic biomes. We talked about estuaries. We talked about how life is different in the intertidal zones. And now we're going to go in deep waters. So there's a photic zone and the aphotic zone in marine biomes, correct? The photic zone contains one of the most important living things of all times. These are plankton. Plankton. These are small organisms that float, including the cyanobacteria, diatom, dinoflagellates, the green algae, and this is coxolithia. Cool-looking creatures. These are very important. Green algae. Green algae. What do you think it's called? Why is it green? Very good. Photosynthetic, of course. Plankton are very important because whales and other living things feed on them. Plankton also are one of the most important photosynthetic living things, the phytoplankton. Here's the photic zone. So the deeper you go, the weirder the living things get. Look at these guys, they carry your orange flashlight. Very, very. How come they can survive such extreme water pressures, right? Right? Is because they have adaptations that allow them to withstand the water pressures like that. We don't know a whole lot because people just don't go study them a whole lot. It's very difficult to actually go down there and capture some of these creatures and bring them here, right? How do you capture them? Think about it for a second, right? Very tough to do. So there's a lot we don't know. Freshwater ecosystems. So freshwater ecosystems, rivers, lakes, wetlands, and streams, etc. Freshwater ecosystem, even in a lake, okay, it's very interesting. You look at a lake, like a pond over here, you think the life is homogeneous, the same all the way through. It's not. The life closer to the edges of a lake is different from the life closer to towards the middle. So the deeper the water is, first of all, the colder it is, and there's less light, and there's less biodiverse there.